More than 2,500 years ago, during the chaos of ancient China's spring and autumn period, around the 5th century BCE, a strategist named Sun Tzu wrote a text that would quietly outlive dynasties, empires, revolutions, and even modern technology. And here is what almost no one tells you about that text. It was never truly about war. It was written in a time of collapsing alliances and constant conflict, when survival demanded something more dangerous than courage. It demanded clarity. This book was not drafted inside a peaceful academy. It was forged in instability. It was written for rulers who could not afford emotional mistakes. And yet today, most people misunderstand it within the first 5 minutes of reading it. They think it is about violence. It is not. It is about control. Control of perception. Control of emotion, control of timing, control of environment, control of outcomes before anyone realizes outcomes are being shaped. The art of war was composed around 500 BCE, likely during Sun Tzu's service under King Helu of Wu. This was not philosophy for debate. This was psychological engineering tested in real conflict. And here is where it becomes uncomfortable. The battlefield Sun Tzu described is not ancient terrain. It is your life. Your negotiations are battlefields. Your investments are battlefields. Your reputation is a battlefield. Your leadership presence is a battlefield. Even your emotional reactions are battlefields. And once you see that, you cannot unsee it. So stay with me, because in a moment, I'm going to show you the one principle most leaders quote, but completely misapply, and it quietly destroys their leverage. Sun Tzu opens with a statement so simple that most people rush past it. He says every battle is won before it is fought. Read that again slowly. Every battle is won before it is fought. He is not praising bravery. He is exposing negligence. Because in our modern world, people rush. They argue without leverage. They negotiate without research. They invest without structure. They expand without systems. Sun Tzu would call that intellectual laziness. Victory, in his framework, is engineered long before confrontation begins. The deal you lose today was lost weeks ago. The mistake you regret began in a small signal you ignored. The collapse you fear was visible, but inconvenient. Strategic thinkers do not wait for conflict. They design inevitability, and that is where most people fail. They fight harder instead of preparing deeper. Now here is the line people quote endlessly and rarely understand. The supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. That sentence alone separates amateurs from architects. Force is primitive. Influence is advanced. If you constantly have to fight for position, something in your design is weak. The most powerful individuals rarely raise their voice. They alter conditions. They shape narratives. They redirect attention before confrontation even forms. Winning without fighting means restructuring the environment so resistance collapses naturally. Think about dominant companies. They don't fight every competitor. They make competitors irrelevant. Think about leaders whose presence shifts the temperature of a room. They don't argue. They stabilize. That is Sun Tzu in motion. He was never obsessed with aggression. He was obsessed with inevitability. And inevitability is built through preparation, perception, and positioning. Now let me introduce something most analyses skip. Sun Tzu is not teaching tactics. He is teaching architecture. He wants you to build a system where conflict becomes unnecessary. And in the second half of this video, I'll break down the 21 distilled principles that make that architecture work in modern life. But first, we need to understand why most people sabotage themselves before any opponent ever appears. He writes, "If you know the enemy and know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles." Most people obsess over the enemy. They track competitors. They monitor critics. They analyze trends. But they ignore themselves. Or worse, they overestimate themselves. Self-knowledge is not confidence. It is calibration. It is knowing your strengths honestly. It is admitting your weaknesses without ego. It is recognizing your emotional triggers before someone else pulls them. Because if you misjudge yourself, your strategy collapses before engagement even begins. And here is something uncomfortable. The battlefield punishes ego without mercy. Sun Tzu repeatedly warns against anger, against impulse, against emotional volatility. Modern culture rewards reaction, but power rewards restraint. The most dangerous person in any room is not the loudest, it is the calmest. Calm is not weakness. Calm is calculation. Calculation produces precision. Precision produces dominance, and we are only getting started. And here is where most people stop reading. Not because the book becomes difficult, but because it becomes uncomfortable. Sun Tzu is not attacking enemies here. He is dissecting you. And if you listen carefully, you'll notice something unsettling. The greatest threats he describes are not external opponents. They are internal weaknesses, confusion, impatience, ego, overconfidence, fear. And this is where the real battlefield begins. Because if you cannot govern yourself, you cannot govern outcomes. That is the invisible war. And almost no one talks about it. Now stay with me, because I'm going to compress this entire philosophy into 21 distilled principles. Not as slogans, not as motivational lines, but as operational lenses you can apply immediately. And somewhere in these 21, you will recognize yourself. The first principle is this: strategy precedes action. If you act before you think structurally, you are gambling. And gamblers rarely control outcomes. The second principle: victory without conflict is superior to visible dominance. The loud win often creates future resistance. The quiet win creates inevitability. The third principle: knowledge eliminates fear. Most fear is born from uncertainty. Preparation reduces uncertainty. Reduced uncertainty stabilizes emotion. Stabilized emotion sharpens judgment. The fourth principle: information is leverage. The person who knows more reacts less. The person who reacts less controls more. And this is where modern leaders fail. They react publicly. They broadcast prematurely. They reveal position without calculating consequence. Sun Tzu would never do that. The fifth principle: discipline outweighs emotion. Emotion is energy. Discipline is direction. Energy without direction creates chaos. The sixth principle: positioning determines probability. If you enter bad terrain, effort won't save you. In modern life, terrain is platform, timing, and context. Fight in the wrong environment, and you lose before engagement. The seventh principle: timing magnifies force. Early action can be premature. Late action can be irrelevant. Correct timing makes moderate effort feel overwhelming. The eighth principle: deception is structural, not immoral. This makes people uncomfortable. But Sun Tzu isn't encouraging dishonesty. He is encouraging perception management. You do not reveal strength unnecessarily. You do not display weakness publicly without purpose, because perception shapes reaction. Reaction shapes leverage. The ninth principle: flexibility preserves survival. Rigid leaders break. Adaptive leaders endure. Water shapes itself to terrain. That metaphor alone contains more strategy than most modern leadership books. The 10th principle: strength must sometimes be concealed. Underestimation can be a strategic asset. When others misjudge you, they relax. When they relax, they expose. The 11th principle: speed matters only when precision is secured. Fast chaos is still chaos. Measured speed is impact. The 12th principle: leadership requires stability. If the leader is erratic, the structure destabilizes, and destabilized systems collapse quickly. The 13th principle: morale amplifies force. A united team with belief outperforms divided brilliance. The 14th principle: adaptability defeats rigidity. The environment changes. Your ego should not anchor you to outdated strategy. The 15th principle: patience compounds advantage. Impatience sacrifices long-term positioning for short-term validation. Sun Tzu thinks in decades, not moments. The 16th principle: risk must be calculated, not avoided blindly. Avoiding all risk is stagnation. Taking blind risk is destruction. Calculated asymmetry is intelligent expansion. The 17th principle, unity prevents collapse. Internal division weakens even powerful structures. In business, misaligned incentives destroy empires. In personal life, misaligned values create silent fractures. The 18th principle, simplicity enhances execution. Complexity looks intelligent. Clarity wins wars. The 19th principle, preparation reduces chaos. Chaos is rarely random. It is often neglected planning. The 20th principle, awareness outperforms aggression. You do not need to attack everything. You need to understand everything. The 21st principle, mastery begins internally. If you cannot control your impulses, you cannot control your influence. If you cannot restrain ego, you cannot sustain power. And now pause, because here is the uncomfortable truth. None of these principles are violent. They are cognitive. They are behavioral. They are structural. The art of war survived 2,500 years because it describes human psychology under pressure. And human psychology has not evolved as much as technology. Tools change. Ego does not. Platforms evolve. Fear remains constant, which means strategy remains necessary. And if you are still watching at this point, something in you recognizes that this is not ancient history. This is architecture. Architecture of perception. Architecture of influence. Architecture of internal order. And in the final section, I'm going to show you why this book is less about defeating opponents and more about eliminating disorder, and why that shift alone separates amateurs from architects. Stay with me, because the final layer is the one most people miss. Most people think the art of war is about defeating opponents. It isn't. It is about eliminating disorder. And disorder is the real enemy. Disorder in thinking, disorder in emotion, disorder in hierarchy, disorder in preparation. When systems are disordered, collapse becomes inevitable. Sun Tzu understood something most leaders still ignore. External threats are rarely the first cause of failure. Internal weakness is. An empire rarely falls because an enemy is strong. It falls because its structure is fragile. A company rarely collapses because competitors are brilliant. It collapses because internal discipline weakens. A person rarely fails because life is unfair. They fail because reaction replaces strategy, and this is where the shift happens. Sun Tzu is not telling you to become more aggressive. He is telling you to become more ordered. Order in routine. Order in communication. Order in risk assessment. Order in emotional response. Order creates stability. Stability creates confidence. Confidence creates influence. Influence removes the need for force. Think about that carefully. If you constantly need to force outcomes, something in your positioning is flawed. If you constantly defend yourself emotionally, something in your preparation is weak. If you constantly react instead of design, you are fighting unnecessary wars. Sun Tzu would not tell you to fight harder. He would tell you to think deeper. He would ask you to evaluate where disorder exists in your life. Is it in your planning? Is it in your discipline? Is it in your emotional triggers? Is it in your overexposure? Because every unnecessary reaction reveals leverage to someone else. And leverage, once exposed, shifts power away from you. Now consider this. The highest form of dominance is not visible victory. It is internal composure. If someone provokes you and you remain calm, you gain psychological asymmetry. If someone pressures you and you remain structured, you gain negotiation leverage. If chaos surrounds you and you remain analytical, you create stability others gravitate toward. Stability becomes authority. Authority becomes influence. Influence becomes inevitability. That is the quiet circle of dominance. And it does not look dramatic. It looks controlled. Sun Tzu's greatest insight is not about combat. It is about rhythm. Rhythm of action and pause. Rhythm of concealment and reveal. Rhythm of preparation and execution. If you control rhythm, you control tempo. If you control tempo, you control engagement. If you control engagement, you control probability. And probability, when tilted repeatedly in your favor, compounds into power. You do not need certainty. You need favorable odds. Favorable odds are built through structure. Let me speak directly to you now. If you are building something, a company, a brand, a leadership role, a reputation, this book is not asking you to dominate loudly. It is asking you to design quietly. Design before exposure. Design before confrontation. Design before announcement. Design before expansion. Because expansion without structure magnifies weakness. Scale without discipline amplifies disorder, and amplified disorder collapses quickly. Sun Tzu constantly returns to awareness. Awareness of terrain, awareness of timing, awareness of self, awareness of opponent. Awareness reduces surprise. Surprise destabilizes systems. Destabilized systems break. So awareness becomes preventative strength, not reactive strength. Preventative strength. This is why he warns against ego. Ego blinds awareness. Ego exaggerates strength. Ego dismisses warning signs. And most collapses begin with ego expansion, not enemy invasion. Humility, then, becomes strategic armor. Humility keeps perception sharp. Sharp perception prevents overextension. Prevented overextension preserves longevity. Longevity compounds advantage. Compounded advantage becomes dominance. That is the arc of strategic life, not noise, not constant competition, but structured endurance. Now imagine applying this tomorrow. You walk into a meeting. Instead of speaking first, you observe. Instead of reacting emotionally, you assess leverage. Instead of chasing short-term validation, you protect long-term positioning. Instead of escalating conflict, you redirect environment. You would move differently. You would feel calmer. You would feel measured. You would feel slightly ahead of the room. That feeling is not superiority. It is preparation. And preparation is invisible power. The art of war is misnamed. It is not the art of war. It is the art of alignment. Alignment between intention and execution. Alignment between perception and strategy. Alignment between patience and timing. When alignment exists, chaos reduces. When chaos reduces, clarity rises. When clarity rises, decisions improve. When decisions improve, outcomes compound. And when outcomes compound quietly over time, the world calls it power. But you will know the truth. It was preparation. It was restraint. It was discipline. It was awareness. It was internal mastery applied consistently. That is why this book survives centuries. Not because warfare continues, but because human psychology remains predictable. Fear still drives rushed decisions. Ego still blinds assessment. Impatience still sacrifices positioning. Overexposure still invites resistance. And wherever those patterns exist, Sun Tzu remains relevant. So when you close this conversation, do not think about ancient battlefields. Think about structure. Think about where disorder exists in your system. Think about where reaction replaces design. Think about where ego overrides awareness. Think about where preparation is shallow. Because the battlefield of 2026 is not physical. It is informational. It is psychological. It is reputational. And the person who masters internal order first moves differently in external chaos. Calmer, sharper, less reactive, more deliberate, more aligned. That alignment will not look dramatic. It will look quiet, but it will be powerful. And if you apply even half of these 21 principles intentionally, you will notice something subtle. You will argue less. You will observe more. You will speak more precisely. You will choose timing more carefully. You will feel less threatened. Because when structure increases, fear decreases. And when fear decreases, clarity expands. That is the real victory, not defeating enemies, eliminating disorder. That is the real art, not of war, but of control. And once you understand that, you do not need to fight louder. You need to think deeper. That is where strategy begins, and that is where dominance becomes inevitable.